If there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go of what once felt like home. Healing isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and built one hard choice at a time. You don't owe anyone your peace. You deserve to choose yourself, even if it means walking a lonelier path for a while. Have you ever had to choose peace over loyalty? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. If this story touched your heart, comment 1, or tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't resonate, I still want to hear. Share your view and where you're tuning in. And if you want more stories that speak to the heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these voices alive. Thank you for being part of this journey. The night air in Charleston felt heavier than usual, the kind that clings to your skin and slows your breath. I pulled the collar of my jacket tighter around my neck as I locked up the bookstore, feeling that familiar satisfaction of another quiet day ended. The shop lights flickered off, and with them, the hum of my carefully built life faded into a comfortable stillness. By the time I reached my small white house on the edge of town, the sky had melted into deep bruises of purple and gray. I kicked off my shoes, set the kettle to boil, and breathed in the silence that I had fought years to earn. No footsteps upstairs, no shouting, no guilt draped over the walls like heavy curtains. Just me. Finally, just me. The knock at the door came sharp and sudden. I froze, teacup halfway to my mouth. Nobody ever knocked at this hour unless it was trouble. I set the cup down, heart tapping nervously against my ribs, and moved toward the door with slow, cautious steps. Instinct, old and worn and stitched into my bones, told me to tread lightly. When I cracked the door open, the world tilted on its axis. There she stood, Ramona, my mother. After 17 years of silence so complete I had convinced myself she might not exist anymore. There she was, same sharp cheekbones, same unapologetic tilt of her chin, like no time had passed at all. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, voice sweetened by something that wasn't love. "I'm home." I didn't remember stepping back, but the cold from outside seeped into my bare feet. "What are you doing here?" My voice sounded foreign, too small against the enormity of her presence. She smiled. "A quick, brittle thing. Family stays together. I thought it was time to move back in." No apology, no acknowledgement of the years she left me to fend for myself. Just a declaration, like her absence had been a minor inconvenience we were both meant to overlook. Before I could piece a response together, the sound of gravel crunching pulled my eyes to the driveway. Another figure emerged from a battered car, smaller, thinner, dragging a suitcase that looked heavier than she was. Corinne, my half-sister, the ghost of a life that had never included me. She wore an old hoodie 2 sizes too big and a smile rehearsed to the point of cruelty. "We have nowhere else to go," she said, voice trembling with just enough precision to gather sympathy from anyone who might be watching. For a moment, the world around me narrowed. The sagging front porch, the cracked sidewalk, the battered suitcase, all of it pinching at something tender in my chest. I saw flashes. Standing alone at the school gate, gripping a lunchbox I had packed myself, blowing out candles on a birthday cake I had bought from the clearance aisle, sleeping under a quilt that smelled nothing like home. All the times I had waited for them to come back, and all the times they didn't. The part of me that had grown strong in the silence, that had learned how to live without waiting, pulled me upright. I gripped the doorframe so tightly my fingers ached. "This is not your home," I said, voice steady, even as my heart thudded hard against my ribs. I didn't wait to see the looks on their faces. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned back against the wood, feeling the echo of the slam ripple through my chest. For a long moment I stood there, willing my heart to slow, my breath to even out. Then from the counter my phone buzzed, sharp, urgent. I hesitated before picking it up. A text from an unknown number lit the screen. "You can't shut us out forever." And just like that, I knew. The storm hadn't even started yet. The fog hung thick over Charleston that morning, a damp heaviness pressing against the windows, wrapping itself around the edges of the house. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, staring at the unopened text still glaring at me from the night before. You can't shut us out forever." The words felt less like a threat now and more like a promise. I set the phone down face first and pressed my palms to my forehead, willing the rising tide of dread back down into whatever pit it came from. A thud outside snapped me upright. I moved cautiously toward the window, lifting the curtain only slightly. There, on the front steps, sprawled Corinne, her body limp, hair splayed dramatically across the porch. Her suitcase still stood upright beside her like a sad sentry. Already neighbors were gathering. Mrs. Haney from 2 doors down clutched a robe tighter around her chest, murmuring something to Mr. Fields, who frowned deeply in my direction. I could almost hear the narrative writing itself in their heads. Poor girl, heartless sister. Heat flooded my cheeks as humiliation prickled down my spine. I yanked the door open and stepped outside just enough for the nearest neighbor to hear. "I'm handling it," I said, voice sharper than I intended. Mrs. Haney's eyebrows rose, and Mr. Fields shook his head in disappointment. No words were exchanged, but they didn't need to be. Judgment clung to the air, heavier than the humidity. I closed the door harder than necessary, the sound echoing in the quiet street, and leaned against it, chest heaving. I had lived years building something unremarkable, something small, quiet, safe. And now it was all crumbling because someone else decided my peace belonged to them. My phone buzzed again. This time, a familiar number flashed across the screen. My grandmother, Eileen. "You are a disgrace. Family is everything. Open your door or shame will follow you." I read the words once, then twice. My stomach twisted, not with guilt, but with something deeper, the raw scrape of old wounds reopening. They hadn't cared about me when it mattered. They hadn't shown up when birthdays passed in silence, or when the ache of loneliness gnawed holes in my ribs. But now that I had something built by my own hands, now they remembered. I dropped the phone onto the table and paced the kitchen. If I opened the door, the neighbors might stop staring, the gossip might die down, the messages might end. But at what cost? I flashed back to sitting at the window at 8 years old, wearing my best dress, waiting for a birthday party that no one ever planned to attend, waiting until the sky grew dark and the cake sagged under its own disappointment. No, I had waited enough for them. I drew the curtains closed. I turned the lock until it clicked firm and final. Then I sat back down at the kitchen table, my breath shallow but steady. The house felt smaller somehow, tighter, like a fort under siege. But it was mine. I was not going to let them take that away from me. The silence wrapped itself around me again, a heavy but necessary shield. I picked up my phone to toss it onto the counter, but just as my fingers brushed the screen, it buzzed again. A notification, a new group chat, family first. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. The first preview line was enough. Let's show her what loyalty really means. The sky in Charleston that afternoon wore a dull gray, the clouds sagging low as if they carried secrets too heavy to bear. I sat curled up on the worn couch in the living room, phone in hand, thumb hesitating over the newest notification. Family first. The group chat name stared back at me like a dare. Against my better judgment, I tapped it open, and immediately regretted it. A flood of messages blurred together, snapshots of Corinne sitting sadly on the curb, her battered suitcase in view. Comments from cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade, clucking their tongues about cold-hearted Delphine. Uncles I barely remembered, typing out paragraphs about loyalty and the bonds of blood. Aunts reminding me, as if it were gospel, that forgiveness was not optional in our family. Somewhere deep inside, shame tightened its grip, an old, unwelcome friend. I scrolled in numb disbelief as accusations stacked atop one another, until it felt like the phone itself weighed 100 pounds in my hand. How could they all so easily believe I was the villain? A bitter laugh escaped me, soft and hollow, and my mind, treacherous as ever, yanked me backward in time. I saw myself again, a little girl standing awkwardly on the fringes of family gatherings, clutching a paper plate sagging under cheap hot dogs and soggy coleslaw. Corinne at the center of it all, lifted high like a golden trophy, praised for the smallest triumphs, adored for simply existing. I was invisible then. I was invisible now. The sound of something hitting the mailbox outside snapped me back to the present. I waited a beat before rising, heart already sinking. In the mailbox, a thick envelope, my name scrawled across it in a hand I knew too well. Ramona. I carried it back inside like it might explode in my hands. Sitting back down, I slid it open and pulled out several sheets of lined paper, the words bleeding across the page like a wound that refused to close. Your selfishness destroyed this family. The first line hit harder than a slap. Ramona's letter was a masterclass in blame. Not once did she mention the nights she left me alone, or the birthdays forgotten, or the years I spent wondering why I wasn't enough. No. In her version of the story, I was the one who turned my back. I was the reason she lost Corinne. I was the cause of all their pain. Fury bloomed in my chest, hot and wild. But underneath it was something worse. Disbelief. How could someone twist the truth so thoroughly and believe it? My fingers trembled as I folded the letter neatly back into the envelope. For a moment, I considered responding, pouring out all the memories I carried like scars, explaining in painstaking detail why I owed them nothing. But then another memory surfaced, unbidden. Ramona's car pulling away from the curb as I stood there, backpack in hand, too young to understand abandonment, too proud to cry. She hadn't looked back then, and I wouldn't look back now. I rose, walked outside to the small fire pit in the backyard, and fed the letter to the flames. The paper curled and blackened, the hateful words dissolving into ash as the sun began to dip behind the trees. I watched until the last ember flickered out, breathing in the acrid smoke, feeling something inside me harden into certainty. Just as I turned to go back inside, my phone buzzed again in my pocket. A single new message from a private number. We're just getting started. The words sliced through the quiet like a knife. The storm was only beginning. The mist had thickened by the time I got home, cloaking the streetlights in blurry halos. My skin prickled with unease as I checked the mailbox, a reflex I hadn't yet broken despite everything screaming at me to avoid it. Another envelope waited. No return address, just my name, jagged and angry across the front. I stood for a moment on the porch, the damp air seeping into my bones, trying to will myself not to care. But I knew better. I always opened them, as if some part of me still believed that this time there might be something different inside. The letter was short, brutal. Ramona's words dripped with a venom I almost admired for its efficiency. Corinne is pregnant, homeless, because of you. Each line was a jab, perfectly placed. My hands shook as I read the part where she called me worse than the mother who left you. The old hunger to be seen, to be forgiven, twisted violently inside me. It was a special cruelty, to weaponize the very thing I had spent years trying to survive. That gnawing, childlike belief that family was supposed to mean something. I dropped the letter on the kitchen counter like it was poison and stared out the window into the creeping dark. Somewhere, buried deep under the anger and the disgust, a thin thread of doubt slithered in. Was I heartless? Had I become the very thing I swore I'd never be? The porch light buzzed on automatically as the sky turned black, and I was dragged backward through time. A little girl, nose pressed against the window glass, waiting for a mother who never came back. A cake bought with babysitting money, candles melting into lopsided puddles. The porch light flickering on again and again, a beacon no one answered. Family had abandoned me first. The thought landed sharp and certain. I shut the curtains hard and turned on every lock, every deadbolt, the house tightening around me like a second skin. I tried to read, to distract myself with the fictional problems of fictional people, but my phone buzzed again, pulling me back to the real nightmare. An anonymous number. You'll regret everything you've done. The words sent a chill down my spine colder than the night air. I shoved the phone into a drawer and turned off the lights, letting the dark wrap around me. Maybe if I couldn't see them, they couldn't touch me. But that was a lie too. The headlights came first, a car idling too long across the street, shadows shifting near the neighbor's hedges. Paranoia? Maybe. But after everything, could I really afford to believe it was nothing? I sat at the kitchen table, fingers curled tightly around a chipped coffee mug, heart hammering against my ribs. No more guilt, no more doubt. If they wanted a war, they'd find out just how much fight I still had left. A loud knock shattered the silence. Not at the front door, but at the back, where no one ever came. The cup slipped from my fingers, shattering on the tile. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands as the knocking grew harder, more urgent. This time, I wouldn't wait for them to break me. The morning after the knock, Charleston looked like it had been drained of all its colors. A thick mist clung to the ground, curling along the sidewalks, heavy enough to feel like another weight pressing on my chest. I sat by the window with a mug of coffee gone cold in my hands, staring into the grayness, waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. The doorbell rang, and my heart gave a panicked lurch. It was Mrs. Haney from 2 doors down, clutching a package awkwardly against her chest. Her smile was tight, her eyes nervous as she handed it over without a word. No return address, no handwriting I recognized. I closed the door softly behind me and placed the package on the kitchen counter. My fingers hesitated at the tape before tearing it open. Inside was a doll, old, grimy, its dress torn and stained, with one glassy eye missing. Across its little cloth torso, in thick black letters, "Return." I dropped it instinctively, the thing landing on the tile with a hollow thud. Fear pricked the back of my neck, but beneath it, a colder anger was beginning to rise. This wasn't a joke. This was a message. I picked up the doll with trembling hands, holding it at arm's length like it might bite, and flashes of childhood snapped into focus. School plays where my seat stayed empty, talent shows where I looked out into a sea of unfamiliar faces, searching for one that would never come. Did I ever really have a place among them? Had I ever been anything but a placeholder in their perfect little world? I wrapped the doll in a plastic bag, double-knotted it, and shoved it deep into the trash can outside, feeling the mist cling harder to my skin as I moved. The bookstore felt like a safer place, so I drove there without thinking, trying to outrun the chill that had burrowed into my bones. But safety was an illusion. Tucked under the bookstore door was another envelope, damp from the mist, but unmistakably deliberate. Inside, photographs, snapshots of family parties, vacations, birthdays. All moments where I should have been, could have been, but wasn't. In some, it was clear. A half-cropped shoulder where a child had once stood. In others, there wasn't even a trace of me. One photo had a caption scribbled in thick black ink, "Our perfect little world." Perfect, apparently, because I wasn't in it. The betrayal hit harder than I expected, freezing something inside me that had still been hoping, somewhere deep down, for acknowledgement, for an apology, for anything but this. I leaned against the counter, the photos trembling in my hands, tears stinging at the corners of my eyes. The instinct to beg for inclusion was strong, ingrained, but I forced myself to look at the evidence in front of me. They had never seen me as family. They had only ever seen me as expendable. A brittle kind of clarity settled over me as I wiped my face on my sleeve. I wasn't the villain here. I was the casualty of their carefully constructed fantasy. I spent the next hour posting new security signs outside the bookstore and arranging for the home surveillance upgrade I had been putting off. It wasn't anger fueling me anymore. It was something colder, sharper, survival. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long skeletal shadows across the street, I felt the exhaustion of the day settle into my bones. I flipped the sign on the bookstore door to closed and stepped out into the thickening mist. Across the street, a figure stood, too still, too silent, watching. I met their gaze, heart hammering, but I didn't flinch. I didn't turn away. They could watch all they wanted. I wasn't running anymore. The afternoon pressed down on Charleston like a heavy hand, thick clouds stretching low across the rooftops. Inside my kitchen, I sat frozen at the table, staring at an envelope I had almost left in the mailbox. Some part of me knew it would be more of the same, yet somehow worse. I tore it open with the careless anger of someone too tired to pretend anymore. The words inside were like tiny knives. You were an obligation, not a joy, no apologies, no shame. Just a flat, brutal statement, as though it explained everything, as though it excused everything. I let the letter fall onto the table, the paper fluttering against the wood like a dying thing. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Then slowly the numbness peeled away. It wasn't me. I hadn't failed them. They had failed me. Memories unfurled behind my eyes. Birthdays spent alone, calls never returned, promises broken so casually they barely registered after a while. Each recollection slotted into place like cold stones, building a wall I didn't even realize I had started years ago. I wasn't mourning the mother I lost. I was mourning the mother I never had. The bookstore felt different when I arrived, tense, off-kilter. Customers whispered behind the shelves, casting sideways glances in my direction. Lisa, my part-time manager and closest friend, pulled me aside, her expression grim. "You need to see this," she said, handing me a crumpled printout. It was from a local gossip forum, a thread that had exploded overnight. Heartless bookstore owner abandons her pregnant sister on the street. They had twisted the story until it barely resembled reality. Corinne's lies had metastasized into a weapon aimed squarely at my livelihood, my life. Boiling fury surged in my chest, tamped down only by years of practice. Rage was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. That night, I sat across from Lisa in the dim back office, the buzz of the fluorescent lights filling the silence between us. "We can fight this," she said simply. And I believed her. Legal options, security upgrades, restraining orders. We plotted quietly, methodically, like soldiers preparing for a siege. By morning, new cameras blinked from hidden corners of my property, new signs warned off trespassers, new locks clicked into place with mechanical finality. I didn't look out the window hoping someone would understand anymore. I didn't need them to. I understood myself. As the sun set, casting long, fractured shadows across the street, I flipped the sign on the bookstore door to closed and gathered my things. The air smelled faintly of rain, and for a brief, reckless second, I let myself imagine that this chapter was finally closing. The shatter of glass ripped that hope apart. A rock crashed through the front window, shards scattering across the floor. Heart hammering, I rushed forward, careful not to cut myself, and saw the note tied to the stone. "Monsters deserve to be exposed." The words bled across the paper in angry, uneven strokes. I tightened my grip around the note, my knuckles whitening. I wasn't the monster here, and I wasn't running anymore. By late afternoon, the air in Charleston felt like it might tear apart at the seams. Thick, brooding clouds hung low over the city, mirroring the weight pressing into my chest. I sat behind the counter at the bookstore, counting the minutes between customers, each one a hollow reminder of what was slipping through my fingers. The bell over the door barely chimed anymore. Lisa hesitated before approaching, a folded sheet of paper clutched tightly in her hand. She laid it on the counter between us, avoiding my eyes. It was a printout from a neighborhood gossip page. Photos of Corinne, huddled on the sidewalk like some abandoned stray, captioned in bold letters, "Heartless, cruel, abandoner of family." Beneath it, comments piled up like trash. People I'd never met. People who knew nothing about me, passing judgment as easily as breathing. I folded the paper slowly, my hands steady even as my heart cracked at the edges. This was what they wanted. To isolate me, to strip away everything I had built, brick by careful brick. And it was working. Customers who did step through the door barely glanced at me. Some demanded refunds for books they hadn't even cracked open. Others muttered under their breath, loud enough to be heard, about how disgraceful it was to leave family out in the cold. Their judgment clung to me like the humid air, suffocating and inescapable. I thought about the years I had spent carefully crafting this life. The late nights stocking shelves, the holidays spent alone but proud, the quiet mornings opening the store just as the sun crested the harbor. Now it was all crumbling. Not because of something I had done, but because of lies. That night, after locking up early, I moved through the house like a shadow. I double-checked every window, every door. Sleep felt like a foolish luxury. Around 2 a.m, the faint metallic clink of the back gate swinging open jolted me upright. I crept to the kitchen, heart pounding, and flicked on the monitor for the security camera. There they were. Corinne and another shadowed figure, hunched low, fumbling with the back door. My breath caught painfully in my chest. I grabbed the bat from beside the fridge, not to go outside, not to confront them, but to stand ready if they breached my walls. With shaking hands, I called the police. The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady, grounding me as she promised help was already on the way. I watched from the window, frozen, as flashing lights turned the mist outside into a swirling, chaotic painting. Officers descended quickly, shouting commands, the silhouettes scattering like roaches. I stayed inside, hands gripping the bat so tightly my knuckles ached. It didn't take long. Corinne was tackled just beyond the hedges, her accomplice disappearing into the night. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the thunderous beat of my own survival. When the police finally knocked, I let them in, answering questions with a voice that barely shook. They assured me the restraining order process could begin immediately, something concrete, something real I could hold against this madness. Through the window, I watched them load Corinne into the back of the patrol car. For a moment, her eyes met mine, wide, wild, unrepentant. Her lips moved silently, mouthing words that sliced through the thin glass like a blade. This isn't over. And for the first time, I believed her. The air around Charleston crackled with something I couldn't name. It was early morning when I stepped into the bookstore, but it already felt too late. My name, my life, had been dragged across every social feed and gossip forum overnight. I scrolled through the posts, each one slicing a little deeper. Corinne's photos, her captions dripping with crafted sadness. Abandoned by blood. Left to starve by the one who promised to love me. It didn't matter that none of it was true. The damage was done. By noon, cancellations flooded the store's inbox. Regular customers stopped returning my hellos. Even Lisa, usually steady, looked pale and unsure behind the counter. When the third text arrived, from a friend who should have known better, hinting that making things right might restore my reputation, something inside me snapped, but not in the way they expected. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to explain myself to people who had decided they didn't need the truth. I crafted a statement instead, calm, measured. Every word carefully chosen, every emotion tempered with dignity. I posted it once, across my business page and my personal one. No rage, no defense, just facts. I detailed my ownership of the house, the years of silence, the repeated manipulations, and then I let it sit there, without refreshing, without responding to the inevitable chaos it would cause. Later that week, I walked into the courthouse, every muscle in my body drawn tight with tension. The courtroom buzzed with a low, angry energy, as if the very walls knew they were about to bear witness to something ugly. Corinne's lawyer painted me as a monster with a cold heart, a woman so obsessed with her own comfort she would leave family to rot in the streets. When it was my turn, I rose, heart pounding, palms slick, and laid out my evidence. Security footage, text messages, a timeline so clean even the most sympathetic onlooker would have to pause. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply told the truth, piece by brutal piece. Watching Corinne's composure crack as the evidence mounted was like watching a porcelain doll shatter. Slow at first, then all at once. The judge's verdict came down in crisp, unwavering words. Restraining orders, protection, freedom. The weight that lifted from my shoulders was immediate, but it didn't erase the ache that had settled deep in my chest. Victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like mourning. As I stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun, blinking against the brightness, I heard her voice rise above the noise of traffic and footfall. "Family always comes back for you," she screamed, venom thick in her throat. I paused only for a moment, not because I believed her, but because once, long ago, I had wanted her words to be true. Not anymore. The morning felt almost too perfect. A rare, clear sky stretched over Charleston, the humidity briefly forgotten. I sat on the porch, legs tucked under me, a cup of coffee warming my hands. The silence around me was so profound it felt surreal, as if the world itself was holding its breath. It had been days since the courtroom, days since I had last heard her voice, shrieking across the parking lot. Days since the relentless flood of messages had stopped. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt light. Instead, all I felt was tired. I closed my eyes, letting the sun touch my face, willing myself to soak in the stillness, to believe in the calm. The phone buzzed on the porch table beside me. I opened one eye and reached for it, already guessing it wouldn't be good. It wasn't. Eileen. A public post splashed across my screen. One last desperate performance for an audience she still believed she controlled. She was sick, she claimed, gravely ill, begging for the family to rally, for forgiveness, for understanding. And just like that, the messages started pouring in again. Distant cousins I hadn't spoken to since childhood suddenly remembered my number. Distant relatives reminding me of duty and blood, and how it was never too late to forgive. I set the phone down carefully, hands steady, despite the old ache surfacing in my chest. It would have been so easy once, to crumble under the weight of their demands, to shrink myself back into the desperate girl waiting by the phone on every birthday, listening for a call that never came. I thought about her, that little girl, sitting at the edge of hope and disappointment, clutching a party hat that no one else would wear. I wasn't her anymore. Maybe I never really had been. That afternoon, I pulled out a piece of stationery, heavy, cream-colored, the kind reserved for real things, things that mattered, and began to write. "Dear Eileen," I wrote, and then I stopped, the pen hovering over the paper. What was there left to say? I folded the blank sheet into an envelope, sealed it, and tucked it into the drawer. Some debts didn't need to be paid. Some cycles didn't need to continue. Later, I stood in the backyard, knees deep in damp soil, hands dirty as I planted a young oak tree. Its roots barely reached the surface now, fragile and uncertain. But with time, they would anchor deep, unseen, unshakable, new roots for a new life. I wiped my hands on my jeans, heart beating slow and steady. Inside, the phone buzzed again, a new number flashing on the screen. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I smiled faintly and turned back toward the house, feeling the sun trace a warm line down my back. There was no turning back now, only forward. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the greatest peace comes not from fixing the broken, but from walking away from it. I spent years believing that love meant endurance, that family meant obligation. But healing taught me otherwise. True family respects your boundaries, lifts you up, and never weaponizes your love against you. Maybe you've had to make a hard choice too, one that left you feeling guilty or alone. If so, know this: choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. It's the beginning of a life built on your terms, not on guilt and manipulation. What about you? Have you ever had to draw a line, even when it hurt? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. It would mean so much to connect with you. If this story touched your heart, leave a 1 in the comments. And if it didn't resonate, I still welcome your thoughts. Tell me why and where you're tuning in from. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories that heal, challenge, and inspire, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more voices to light. Thank you for being here.